This episode is easily one of the coolest ones we've done. We're talking with Blake Hall, founder and CEO of ID.me, a company and service that nearly every service member is familiar with and has used. And I would venture to say something every person in the entire country will use in the not too distant future. In addition to discussing the amazing things they're working on ID.me, small issues like helping prevent the hundreds of billions of dollars that are lost to fraud annually and solving digital voter identification, we also discuss his experiences with the Army in Iraq and how they informed his passion and purpose that serve as a foundation for what he and his team are building at ID.me. So turn up the volume a notch. You're not going to want to miss this one. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military. I love the Ranger swag in the back. Is that
Oh,
the swamp phase or
yeah.
a paddle?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. There's like that room raider thing on Twitter or whatever. And I got like a 10 out of 10, which is I was pumped about. They were doing all the COVID ratings and it was like got the challenge coins, like Captain America shield paddle in the background. They're like, who doesn't want a paddle? So
Absolutely. A cowbell. What else could you ask for?
I know, right? Got a little Saturday Night Live, like Blue Oyster thing going on. So with like Christopher Walken. So
My background's a 0 out of 10, obviously.
yeah, no, all good. I mean, leaves you
I just
guessing.
have the artwork that my wife came up with.
Yeah. If you're a
Little
hostage, there's no clues to help anyone rescue you. So that's a
right, right.
very,
We've
very well thought out.
yes, exactly.
Well, Blake, it's a pleasure to meet you, man. We've heard a lot of great stuff about you. We talked to Kelly Purdue on a previous episode. He had nothing but great things to say. In fact, he was like, "You guys need to talk to Blake and get him on here because he's a very impressive guy. Would have some amazing insights for people, and obviously, I mean, a little bit closer to the transition process than Kelly, maybe
Yeah, a little bit.
just a little." But yeah, we really started this podcast with the aim to help transitioning service members by telling the stories of people that are doing great things post transition, and
Sure.
you fit that mold really well. In fact, we're really excited to dive into things today.
Likewise.
We'd love to start just the standard kind of background question, a little bit about where you come from, but that's such a broad question. Maybe you could zoom in a little bit. We'd love to hear a little bit about your Army background, but also zooming in on kind of the transition process and how you left the military and what things look like kind of in that phase of life. And then we can go deeper from there.
Yeah, of course. So third generation soldier. My grandfather on my dad's side, total 66 months of combat, won a Bronze Star with Valor in World War II, landed at Anzio at 17 years old as Browning automatic rifleman, fought his way through the hedgerows, won a Bronze Star at Saint Etienne, where he like crawled out in front of 3 German machine gun nests to splice a line that kept his battalion from being overrun by a Nazi counterattack. And that was a Bronze Star in World War II. And then standing guard on the Rhine when Germany surrendered, then fought in Korea, 2 tours in Vietnam, command sergeant major, infantryman, big,
Wow.
big boots to fill, right?
No
More time in
kidding.
combat than I spent in the active duty military. So, and then my dad served for about 30 years. His last position, brigade commander of a FORSCOM brigade and MLRS brigade out of Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So always had, big boots to fill, if you will, and wanted to serve to give back because you can't grow up around men like that without feeling that you're obligated to at least do something to give back to the red, white, and blue. Was at Vanderbilt University in from 2000 to 2004, and when 9/11 happened, that changed the arc of my life. Knew that I was going to go to war, so infantry, Ranger School, airborne, the whole thing. Commissioned in '04. I reported to my unit in Fort Lewis, Washington, 3rd Stryker Brigade combat team. I inherited the platoon that was, I can't remember even right now, they were either last or second to last. And within 3 months, we did a live fire exercise where we ranked number 1 out of 14. And then we did a tactical exercise at Umatilla where we captured a striker from our sister battalion, 520, and literally went on like a Dukes of Hazzard road chase with a striker. We told the dude, like, you're our hostage. You have to do it, we say. And he's like, we're Roger. So it was ridiculous. We were populating, NBC attacks and spaceships through the FBCB2 and stuff. So my battalion commander, enjoyed the heck out of that because he got to talk trash to the other guy. And after 5 months, he made me his recon platoon leader over all the first lieutenants who were a year ahead of me. So I wasn't the most popular guy because they were like, "You're doing great, but you've been here for like 2 minutes." And all of a sudden, I was running recon, and I ended up leading that recon platoon for 27 months. Just an amazing run. 15 months of which were in combat in Iraq in 2006 to 2007. So Mosul for 6 months, a little bit of stuff in Lake Tartar and the outskirts of Fallujah, every neighborhood Baghdad, and then down in Karbala running after Case Khazali. Had an amazing mission and an amazing boss. We had National Security Agency assets that were attached to my platoon. And these three-letter agencies, when we were in Kuwait, said, forget everything that you guys have learned about reconnaissance and precision engagement. Okay. And then like you're going to be on a 20-minute string day or night to action high value targets. And so that's what we did. We weren't good at first. I think theater average success rate for these kill capture missions was around 40%. First 2 months, we were around 25%, which is to say that we sucked. But then by like month 3, something clicked, caught the head of the Mujahideen Shura Council for Mosul, the spiritual leader of Al-Qaeda in northern Iraq, Colonel Townsend, who's 4-star general now, made us the brigade force of choice for northern Iraq. The brigade got redesignated as a surge strike force. As we moved down to Baghdad, we started to get by name requests from division. Our pass rate or our success rate continued to go up to the point where the NCOs and the Tactical Operations Center were casting bets not on whether we'd get the target, but how many minutes after on site was the pool. And it manifested at the end where we had Task Force Night, which is the British SAS, said, we're having a really hard time targeting the South Kark vehicle bomb network. You guys have done some really cool things just overall and with your daylight kill capture TTPs. If we embedded special missions units operators, gave you tactical control, and gave you JSOC resourcing, would you action that network? And I was like, is this a trick question? Hell yeah. So then, I'm at the SAS compound and they're like, Blakey, like, you want a brew, mate? Yes, I haven't had a beer in a year. And they're like, Earl Grey or black currant. And I'm like, I hate you guys. I'm like, I hate you so much. I'm like, this is literally why we kicked you out of our country. It was over tea. It was over shit just like this. So anyway, we of like the 9 of the 10 targets for South Kark, within the next 2 weeks, we took 9 of 10 off the field, the entire level of hierarchy underneath them. General Odierno did a press conference after we were the main effort to signal intelligence ambush that took down the number 1 and number 2 guys between Fob Falcon and the airport. And that was amazing. The most proud moment of my professional life is standing in front of those 32 men, scout snipers, attachments. And I said, look, we know the strategy isn't going to work out. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But for what we were asked to do, this network killed thousands of people. And you'll never see the faces of the people who are alive because of the car bombs that never went off. But you can just look at the math. It ceased to exist. And that's something to be really proud of with your kids and with your grandkids for the impact that we had with what we were asked to do. So just love those guys to death. My 40th birthday, over half of them came back from all around the country to fly in, which, super moving. And then, I got into Harvard Business School. I had always made fun of Harvard kids, didn't plan on going there, but the battalion commander, Colonel Huggins, had a master's degree from there. And when I told him I was leaving the military, he had some colorful language for me. But he's like, I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation unless you apply to Harvard. It's like, sir, I haven't used a 3-syllable word in the last year. I don't want to go to Harvard. He's like, you're going to do it or I'm not going to write it. And so, he just changed the arc of my life a bunch of times, as anybody who's been successful and had somebody bet on them early. And that was my military service, and didn't feel confident about the long-term strategy, which I think is borne out by what's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. And so wanted to make an impact in a way that was enduring so that the work would matter for the long term.
And so you transitioned straight out to Harvard Business School then, and that was kind of the next step.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy in a lot of ways. I had a bunch of friends who were killed when I was over there. And so I think, it's easy like with time now, but at the moment, part of me felt half feral of 15 months in combat. And then psychologically, you're moving ahead to a point in your life you don't typically get to until your 70s or 80s, where you're thinking about your own, mortality every day, scared to death that you're going to make a bad decision that's going to hurt one of your guys or worse, and your friends are dying. And then all of a sudden you're like home and you're 26 and where are we going on Friday? And it's just crazy. I don't think I fully ever got over. There was a moment when I was in New York City on leave, which around the holidays. I didn't want to go back at Christmas or New Year's because I was a single guy, but again, Barry Huggins made me do it. And I just remember I felt sick that my guys were still over there in harm's way, and I was in Manhattan. And I just looked at that street of people just partying and going into bars. And I was like, no one actually cares. I mean, they care a little bit. They care that they don't have to do it, but no one really cares that we're over there dying and risking our lives for something that just isn't relevant to a lot of Americans in their day-to-day life. And so that I think the great gift that combat gave me was that I wanted to do something that mattered. I saw how capricious death can be, that it can come at any moment. And when you understand that, your definition of risk changes. The riskiest thing to do is get trapped as like a cog in a large, capitalist machine where you're you're not working for something that matters. So I wanted to capture the same sense of purpose and mission that I felt in the military. I wanted to make an enduring positive impact on people's lives. And I just had this like burning desire to go out and do that, whatever that might be. And that kind of like set me on the path where some dots connected serendipitously that I didn't know at the beginning of the journey, but it's pretty cool now looking back to see how it played out.
It seems like you got a frago or two while you were in the army as well. So I imagine that prepared you quite well for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about what it means to be an entrepreneur and what separates startups from big companies, startups are looking for a secret in the market that nobody else has figured out yet. And they're trying to figure out like a market entry strategy, which is where the real alchemy is at to make something enduring. So, if you think about Uber, people hated cabs, right? What Travis Kalanick did, it's amazing, is like figure out a way that you enter with the rich people and the black car drivers. That's your wedge. Once you have the wedge, then you're a pit bull, and and by personality, just willed that company through. And so, yeah, I think like once you kind of understand what it takes to adapt to problems and to get teams going. That's a lot of what it means to be an officer. My first boss, Brent Clemmer, Silver Star winner, jumped into Kandahar with the Rangers. He said, "Your job as an officer is to go find friction points where the team is stuck and get them moving." And I think that's honestly been true at every stage, but it's even more true at the startup phase because you don't even know if the problem you're working on is a real problem. Once you know it's a real problem that people are willing to spend money for, then you're into like your cost of acquisition and scaling economics. But really, it's a startup is just a collection of experiments to find a secret that nobody else knows. It's like a legal form of insider trading.
Hmm.
Whereas like what we're doing now at IDMe is more about optimizing and extending a business model that we know is successful, and what it takes to get the team unstuck at the different stages is quite different in terms of skill. So it's been an adventure.
Can you bring us back a little bit to
Yeah.
the beginning stages of IDMe and what did you see as the demand there and what was the impetus for you to actually, pursue this idea and run with it?
Yeah, I think so. It's crazy. I was, friends with Simon Sinek now, and he's like torn me apart. So now I understand through him like what the core drive is. He's like, interesting. He's like, I wasn't sure if your core drive was like justice or injustice. He goes, but it's actually to keep people safe. And that is the reason I became a soldier. I've always hated bullies and everything else. And so the initial version of what was called Troop Swap at the time, and a fun fact, I think Google started out as like back rub or or something like that. So
I did not know
Right,
that.
right.
right? It's just funny where you start, where you end up. But I looked at how, these great companies started, like Facebook started as really a hot or not for students, then a social networking, network for the Ivies for students, then grew up. Paradoxically, all the big companies start by focusing small on a defined set of users. And I was like, well, Craigslist hasn't been disrupted in a long time. A lot of military communities don't have a Craigslist, even though they move twice as frequently as the average family. And Craigslist suffers from trust issues. So what if we could, have communities where there's an inherent higher level of trust, like military and students, fill gaps in the market that Craigslist doesn't fill, and start that way. The problem with that, aside from the brand, which like limited us only to the military, so leave that aside because that was a mistake. You don't want to do that. But when you're trying to reach such a small number of users and get network effects going with supply and demand, you need distribution to help you. And so that meant that in order for that play to even have a chance, I needed USAA and military.com and Navy Fed to promote this, trusted marketplace concept. Turns out all these big companies, like 2 to 3 years is fast. I wasn't willing to wait that long to run an experiment while I'm sleeping on my rugby buddy's couch and I'm technically homeless, which is what I was at the time. Paying myself, I declined McKinsey and like $250,000 a year to pay myself $48,000 because classmates were crazy enough to invest in me and some family members. And so I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. But then there were two moments. I said, well, if I can validate that you've served in the military, then the daily deals concept was hot with Living Social and Groupon at the time. I was like, I don't need to source a ton of content. I just need like one great offer from a big brand. And so I set out to try to do that. What happened next was really interesting. The 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 brand marketers, or the marketers at the brand, I should say, they're not brand marketers, they're more like e-commerce and everything. They said, you don't have any users, so your app isn't super interesting to us. But what we developed as part of the onboarding experience, where we had API connectivity to federal agencies and to military banks, specifically USAA, they're like, that's really cool. And we have a lot of programs where we already have offers for specific segments of our customers, but we can't bring them online because we don't have a way to know if they're part of that community. And so, and I said, and if you had a way, they're like, we would integrate it into our own channels. And by the way, it's not just military, it's students, it's first responders, it's teachers, it's nurses. It's our most profitable segments. So if you're a home improvement contractor, it's home or store, it's home improvement contractors. It might be interior decorators for like furniture stores. It might be an athletic trainer for fitness brands. And like, holy cow. So military is like the entry point, but really there's no end to segmentation into how brands think about personalizing experiences and how they would treat a mom or a dad, versus a plumber or whatever in context, or a social influencer. And at that moment I was like, oh, it's PayPal for identity, where they're both wallets, but we're starting with social login at the top of funnel, and then proof that you're you and what your professional occupation is, and how that, just like your physical military ID unlocks benefits. PayPal started with a specific use case of payments, and even their name is like locked to the use case. But I saw that as an opportunity. I'm like, oh, the payment wallets are like the Model T. They're the beginning, not the end. Your wallet does a lot more than pay. And once I realized that what brands wanted was a way to keep their programs safe, and if they could keep their programs safe, they could bring services online. And if they could bring services online, then consumers could access things through the website versus going in store. And it turns out if you're deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq, you can't go to the Apple store in Georgetown to get your military discount. So it's really neat. Keeping customers safe allows them to have more trusted interactions with people online, and online is more convenient. So you end up making life safer and easier. And that's like the through line between, keeping people safe to what we do today. But those two pivots to away from classifieds and kind of Craigslist to Daily Deal, and then turning into a utility, a digital wallet, were really the two things. And once we did that, there was a lot of like times when I almost felt physically sick along the way, but that was product market fit.
No kidding. I think a lot about the tension of push versus pivot. And it seems like you've been presented with several of those sort of situations. A lot of people will advise you continue pushing through, like do those 2 or 3 years that you mentioned with troop swap, and like you'll make it if you just keep on pushing. But how do you consider that kind of decision point, if you will, because been presented with several of those?
Yeah, I mean, fine line between hard and stupid, right? So like and it's the strong opinions that are weakly held, quote. So, do the math. And as I was looking at the cohort analysis for the daily deal stuff, I'm like, man, this doesn't look like a business model to me. I even talked to Tim O'Shaughnessy here in
Hmm.
DC. They ended up raising $1 billion, went to zero. And I was talking to him, and I think it was like late 2011. I was like, I don't know what you're seeing, but this doesn't look like a viable business model in the way that e-commerce is viable, right? Just the active and passive churn is too much. And I went to, so as I had the math and I had the feedback from the marketers about, we would put your digital wallet, into our flows. You shouldn't be a destination site. You should be a wallet. I went up to Andy Dunn's apartment in New York. He's a founder of Bonobos, early investor in IDMe, and the founders of Venmo, Warby Parker, were in there. Andy Ratcliffe, Hall of Fame venture capitalist from Benchmark, who had just started Wealthfront. And Andy gave this speech at the beginning of Wealthfront. And I ended up talking to one of the Warby Parker founders afterwards. And he said, "How much money have you raised so far?" I was like, 2 million. And he just looks at me and he goes, "Don't fuck it up. Big stigma." And so I was like, thank you. But actually, that was the best thing he could have told me, because I had this train ride from New York to DC where I knew what the right thing to do was. I knew that the math showed that the revenue was toxic. The unit economics did not work, it did not scale. I had enough capital to keep pushing, but if the unit economics don't work, you're digging a hole. You're not, and it's just a matter of time before the cash and the time runs out. And so I'm like, look, if this is my one shot at this thing, I'm going to go for it. And went in, told the team, told our investors and board, everything I've been telling you isn't right. But I'd also kind of prep them on, like, this is what we learned. So we validated these assumptions, we invalidated these, put all the chips around this digital wallet, ended up closing Under Armour, launched in like November of 2012, the night before the launch. Like, if it didn't work, we wouldn't have made it. And literally, I felt like I wanted to throw up. I was like in the bathroom, like trying not to throw up, and or maybe trying to throw up so I'd feel better. I don't even know. But like, and then the next day happened, and we ended up signing up, I think, like 48,000 users in 45 days, no cost of acquisition. The distribution was there, and I was like, wow, that feels like product market fit. And there's been a lot of stuff since then, but like, that was the moment that we knew we had hit the vein that put us on the path that we're on today.
I think for us with this podcast and trying to communicate with people how to make that transition, I want to bring it a little bit kind of further back. And of course, you had the Harvard Business School transition point, but how did you take the driving factor that you mentioned of being deployed and having that sort of drive behind what you were trying to accomplish and actually communicate that to what I'm assuming is many civilians who might not have shared the same drive, but probably could see, what the goal was. But how did you communicate that to your employees and at that time, maybe the partners?
Yeah, I think it's hard because on some level felt this like burning need to make a difference. At the same time, I'm pretty pragmatic about being upfront about how things would work. And so when I would pitch investors, what I would always do is like listen to them. And if I didn't know something, I would figure out, like, what is it that I don't know? So you don't want to press too hard when you don't know. That's the mark of a junior leader. Inquiry before advocacy. You want to ask questions. So when, Paige Craig, who's a Marine, like, very well-known investor in his own right, an entrepreneur a few times, he's like, "Blake," he's like, "what's your alpha customer?" And I'm like, "Well, it's, military families and like veterans." He's like, "That's not," he's like, "What's your alpha customer?" And I'm like, kind of like flailing. And I was just like, "Hey, Paige, it appears I have no idea what an alpha customer is. So why don't you tell me?" And he's like, "It's a weirdly specific profile of the exact person that you're building for." And I was like, "Okay, got it." And now you can hear that advice like back through Paul Graham at Y Combinator. It's better to build a product that a small number of people love than a product that a lot of people are lukewarm about, because it's easier to expand satisfaction wise than it is user wise when people don't really care if you exist in the world. So you want to be focused on a small set of users. It's how PayPal with eBay power sellers, Red Bull with adventure seeking young men, Pinterest with Midwestern moms. Every great company paradoxically starts by focusing small. And so I think between that and when I pitched investors and they would ask me about, what about this, this, and this, I'd say, look, these are the assumptions that underpin this plan. And that's what I learned in the military about contingency planning. There of the 450 plus combat patrols I've led, less than this many, five, have actually gone the way that we drew them up. And so the same principles I learned in the military, that mediocre officers can plan a plan. The great officers have all the contingencies played out. And if you ask them about their plan, they're like, well, if that happens, then I'm going to do this. And everyone's already briefed and trained on that. We've talked about it and we've rehearsed it. So that's what we're going to do. And I took some of those same habits that I developed that between the grace of God and great NCOs had kept all of my men alive in Iraq. I just applied it to business. And I said, look, we don't know until we walk this path what is true and what's not. Here's what I think is true. But if it's not, here's how I'm thinking about it. And what happened was we would have investors that came up afterwards, and it's so fucked up what they would do to me. They'd be like, Blake, I don't believe your business model is right. And then they would show me a picture of their like daughter, and they'd be like, I'm going to write you a check for $50,000. And it's like, you know, Kylie's like college fund. And they're like, I believe that you're going to figure it out. And I was like, what is that? Whatever that was. I mean, this didn't just happen once. It happened multiple times where people told me, I don't think it's going to work. Here's my daughter. And I believe in you. So
Well, you weren't still single at the time, right?
no, I was single at the time.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think they were pitching something else to you, maybe.
Yeah, oh, yeah, maybe like future. But yeah, I think the more like so many entrepreneurs just are so scared and insecure that like their baby's going to be called ugly. True confidence is just being clinical about it, just like you're in combat, and say, look, if it works this way, this is what it's going to be. Catch lightning in a bottle, cool. But if you read Steve Blank's Four Steps to the Epiphany, and he wrote the like doctrine that is the FM 7-8 for entrepreneurs, then you realize there's a methodology that's sequential to building a great company. And so, the first order thing is like validate that you have a real problem in that customers are willing to pay for it. And then if they're willing to pay for it, make sure that you can acquire enough of them and make a profit where the unit economics make sense. And then if you can do that, then you can begin to scale. Companies that try to skip those steps, they die. They just invariably run out of capital. So if you're just always iterating around, how do I solve that? I mean, I feel like if you give me enough capital and time now, I'll figure out whatever, because all you have to do is be curious, learn, and not believe your own bullshit, and you'll get to where you need to be.
That's a
And
great
that's the
line.
mindset of an entrepreneur, right? And I guess the follow up for that is, at what point did you know you wanted to start your own thing? I mean, was that why you went to Harvard? Was that part of why you got out of the military? When did you know?
I think what I got tired of was like working towards strategies that didn't matter or actually work. That's what fundamentally sucked about Iraq was a third of the high value targets we caught had already been captured. And guess what? Like all the guys we caught in Mosul, they were released in a prison break. And then all the Al Qaeda in Iraq guys, they got sent to prison in Camp Bucca, which is where Baghdadi networked and became the emir of ISIS. Like you're not actually solving problems, you're playing catch and release with psychopaths. And so that took up enough of my life, where honestly, like we might have made the problem worse by capturing people and letting them coordinate. That's how the command and control of ISIS formed. And so once, I don't know, once you kind of see that and you're like, I'm not going to waste another chapter of my life and my youth and working really hard on something that doesn't make the world better. And so I think it's part of the same core drive of why we wore the uniform, which is you want to make a difference, and you want to really not just make money, but like make an impact and make the world better. And so I think the fact that control gives me agency to make sure that we're always doing that and our North Star is creating positive social impact is why I became an entrepreneur. And what I learned in recon, being a platoon leader for that long was like I just loved leading teams where folks had voice and everyone had a role to play and a skill set they brought to the table. And there's just nothing better than being part of a winning locker room when everyone's like celebrating together. Those are the best moments that make all the hard moments of leadership worth it. And I didn't feel like I was going to get that in a big company, but I could infuse that into a culture that I was forming directly in the same way that nobody really messed with us. Like my boss was amazing. Our results were incredible. And so we kind of just got to do mostly what we wanted to do most of the time. And after getting a taste of that for a couple of years, I couldn't imagine going back to more. And I tried. I love the people at McKinsey, but there was like a Wednesday night where I was over Excel and I was looking at a guy who was a 275 guy, and I was like, dude, like 15 months ago, I'm like targeting this vehicle bomb network that's killing thousands of people. Now I'm working on like a procurement optimization plan for a telecom. I was like, I don't think I can do this. So they were amazing, and I left and took the pay cut, and then was homeless on my rugby buddy's couch, being like, good job. Like had an Harvard Business School offer from like the New York Yankees of management consulting, $250,000 a year, but no, like you decide you're going to be homeless and $48,000, and you don't know anything about technology outside of what you learned in Iraq, but you started a technology company. Amazing. And so kind of the same conversations I would have with myself during Ranger School. But I think if you are self-aware and committed to learning, so many people when they leave school, they stop learning. And I don't understand it. Like when you pick your profession, that's where you should really go nuts. And so it's really been an incredible journey in that sense that like you just figure out what the problem is. You have to learn like crazy. And for all the veterans that are out there too, I remember I was pitching a VC in I think it was 2011 or 2012, and I wanted to raise very well-known VC firm like tier one, and I wanted to raise like $2 million. The guy asked me, he's like, "Well, how are you connecting with your different customers? SAML or OAuth?" And I didn't know what those protocols were, and I felt like my cheeks getting red. And like after the meeting, I was like, what are you doing? If you're going to ask people for $2 million, you had better know every damn detail of the core system. And so I had an amazing partner in Snell, a co-founder and CTO, but I really immersed myself. And, fast forward to like this meeting at the Treasury in 2016, 2017, and Kelly Perdue's on our board, there were MIT professors or all sorts of I noticed a lot of folks were deferring to me around like, identity questions that were technical. And I left and I was like, I'm pretty sure I knew more about identity from a technical point of view than anyone in that room. And he was like, well, he's like, how long have you been working on this now? And I was like, 6 years. He goes, how long does it take to get a PhD? I was like, oh, fair. So again, like if like learning about a combat patrol versus walking one are two different beasts. And ultimately, if you have confidence in your capability, even if you lack the skill, and you're committed to being humble about what you don't know, but like just being a demon about going out and getting access to what you need to know, it's incredible how far you can move. And now I'm friends with Elon, and I'm like, dude, if you can learn rockets from books, I can learn database design. So, you know, just really inspiring to be around people who are like that.
What does it mean to be a demon about going out and getting that stuff? I mean, people look at you and I mean, you're obviously a very, very intelligent guy. So like, oh, well, Blake obviously has picked it up over the years. But if someone's getting out of the military now and they're wanting to get into a different career field, how would you, if we could drill down tactically for a second, how would you really advise them to go deep? And obviously 6 years is, you can go very deep over 6 years, but how would you recommend them tactically to really drill into a new subject?
Yeah, man, there's layers to this, but the first thing it's really about a sense of responsibility and like growth mindset. So there's a lot of people who worry about looking good versus being good.
Hmm.
And what I've practiced in my life that my wife remarks on, she's like, "You're not afraid to ask a question even if it makes you look like an idiot." I'm like, "Thank you." think? She's like, no, she's like, it's one of the habits I admire about you the most is that like, and I'm like, yeah, I want to know, otherwise I'm just wasting my time. So if you're maximizing learning just generally in life, you're going to be a better version of yourself over time. And so you just have to get over your own ego. And so the more that you can focus on being good versus learning good, I think some people might be in that meeting and they're really just focused on getting the $2 million. I'm in that meeting being like, I just humiliated myself and I'm never going to feel this way again. So part of it, that's the core drive, because to be a leader means you have to be worthy of the title. And it means that you have to be skilled at what you're leading. And if you're not skilled, you're not worthy to be the boss. And so the great ones, I think, are always motivated at every stage to learn what they need to know to be credible. Now, I think when you're first starting out, you're going to have a more narrow skill set. And that'll be true probably throughout the journey, right? So there's four. Brian Armstrong wrote this great CEO of Coinbase wrote this great article about what CEOs do. And there's four archetypes of CEOs. There's your technical CEOs like Zuckerberg. There's your operational CEOs like Kalanick. There's your design and like marketing CEOs like Chesky. And then there's your sales and marketing CEOs like Benioff. You can have a great CEO come from any of the four backgrounds, but the other members of the founding team need to be strong in the areas where you're not. And if you actually look, I think as Noah Wasserman from Harvard Business School did a lot of research, like when do founders get divorced and when is it really rancorous? It's usually when there's two founders in the same bucket.
Mm.
So if you are both highly technical and have the technical vision, probably not going to work out. If you're both go-to-market founders, probably not going to work out. But if one's technical and one's go-to-market and the other one's product and design, hacker, hustler, designer, that actually can work. So once you realize I need these core disciplines that form, almost like an A team is composed of cross-functional skill sets, that's what you need to go do. So you have to figure out which bucket am I? How can I lean into my strengths and become really, really good in this domain, and then go out and find other people who are skilled in these other buckets. And then as the company grows and you're figuring stuff out, the challenge becomes how do you get enough breadth across all of it to be able to know what good looks like and to be able to audit to check for alignment. You don't have to be great, but that's what it means to be a good CEO at scale. And like I'll tell you right now, it's like a fire hose. You can see why a lot of folks are like, oh my God, there's government affairs and comms. And, now you've got multiple teams that need to be aligned and there's formal process and product review. And so it's very different in that the challenges aren't existential, but, we have Chinese threat actors and nation state groups and also activists and all sorts of stuff that you got to deal with around, not around the company, of course, but around, issues that the company is tangentially tied into. So it's just this crazy thing as the journey goes, but it all comes from like understanding the core skill sets where you fit in, and then just being incredibly motivated to be worthy of the title of CEO.
Just because today is federal election day, I think the question that I had on my mind was, where do you see the future of identification? And if you can tie it into a little bit of voter ID, if there's anything that you can speak to on that, that would be insightful.
Yeah, I think so. For the future of ID, we are building a digital twin to your physical wallet. And if you can do that, you make life safer and easier. You make it a lot safer and easier for you to log in across different sites where right now people's logins and passwords get breached and hijacked. They have no recourse, your personal information stolen. So if we can just make a single sign-on like Facebook Connect, but for high-risk use cases and low risk, and we're not an advertising company, cool. You can have a trusted and portable login. And then the flip side of that is, once you're able to do that, you're also able to understand who someone is and benefits they might not be aware of. And so there's a stop loss program out of DoD where Congress had retroactively approved about $750 million of combat pay. And even though they extended the program for 2 years, DoD couldn't find veterans who'd already separated. So about $250 million went unexpired. It was an average of $5,000 per claim, I think, if you just filled out a form, they'd mail you a check. And I was like, no, like that can't happen. So the cool part is about what IDMe gets to do is we get to help people if you're, a veteran. I was like, well, if I can get you while you're shopping, then I create a marketing channel where if there's a civic program for vets, where you can't use the first sergeant or the gunny anymore, I can still get to you and get the word out through the community. And that's the real need. But then it turns out there's a ton of that stuff for students, for disaster relief. If you're trying to navigate disaster relief after a hurricane, you have no idea what FEMA is offering or HUD or CMS and everything else. And so the more that we know about you, the more that we can help you find services that are relevant to you and connect those dots. It's just a really cool and noble thing. And I think when you think about e-commerce, like when we're successful, we want IDMe to optimize every single funnel that you go through. Sign up or sign in. You can personalize e-commerce, like the car you drive, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, if you're a military student, gender, demographic, whatever. Personalize that. Discounts and segmentation. Because we know who you are from interactions with government and everything else, we can also prevent fraud and chargeback. And then when we layer in payments at the end, you've got a true digital twin to your physical wallet that just takes friction out of your life, makes it safer, and helps you find stuff that you might not even know about, like free tickets to Busch Gardens that you can take your family for if you served in the military, which is really neat. For voter ID, we have two tests for how we think about use cases that will deliver, and it's legal and safe. So we won't do cannabis because there's legal issues at different levels of government. We just don't like, and our lawyers won't let us, get involved with that. But we also never want to moralize about where you can and can't use your own identity. Like fundamentally, it's yours. If we're going to build a true digital twin, you have to have the agency. Only you have the right to decide where it can be used or not. When it comes to voter ID, the question is, would making it digital make it safer or not than the current process? I think the hard part is I don't know because we don't have standardization about to even measure how secure the existing process is, which is a problem. But that's the litmus test that when we look at would we service this use case, we have to believe that IDME's presence there is both legal, that's important, and safe. And by safe relative to how the existing process is delivered today. With some of the attacks that we're seeing from nation state attackers that we're fending off at the federal government, I do not believe it is safe to digitize voter ID at scale. Right now, I do think there are certain populations like the military that have PKI credentials and a need to vote absentee, that if you wanted to show how voter ID could be done safely, the military is actually a wonderful place to start because that CAT card that we have could authenticate possession. It's super secure. It's got all sorts of cryptography built into it. And that could create a blueprint for how cities and states might emulate a DoD pilot on military voting. But I see that unfolding over, maybe a decade or two. But if you wanted to get it going back to the military, what a great entry community to show that there is a way to do it safely, like they're doing in Europe, and then see where it goes from there.
It's super interesting. I didn't even think about the military being a use case. I mean, that makes so much sense given all the credentialing and biometrics that already exist with that population.
That's right. If you can free ride on top of it, like take advantage of the trust and use what is already there. And again, you're back to Paul Graham, like the big companies try to focus for everyone. The really skilled entrepreneurs go, I'm going to start right there. And it's like the board game Risk. Like you don't go straight for Asia. That's always like if you want to lose and be out of the game fast, you go for Australia.
I'm with you, man.
Yeah.
My
Well,
strategy.
and the military already has such a need for absentee ballots, so that's kind of it makes sense on multiple levels as well. So that's phenomenal.
Bipartisan support, like, and yeah, so whenever you're like looking across and you're like, it's safe from a technology point of view, there's a disproportionate need for this population to be able to vote electronically because they're dispersed globally. It's super secure because it's living on top of a federal government issuance and tokenization process. You're like, cool. And then you look at Europe and Estonia, they vote the same way through PKI credentials. So that's how the European countries do it. And yeah, anyway, we'll see. I think unfortunately right now in our social media has got everybody in fight or flight. And when everyone's in fight or flight, you can't hear each other. It's an emotional conversation and not a logical one. And hurting for America right now because it's just so frustrating to see this wonderful country not able to use its higher reasoning as a collective and instead is just always in, this like reflexive emotional knee-jerk reaction that short circuits a lot of really promising things that can thread the needle to get us to a better place.
Yeah, we even had a discussion on whether to ask, just because it is oddly enough a polarizing issue.
Yeah.
But it's, so thank you for that. That's great.
Blake, I have a personal question here. So I have a 1-year-old, and I heard you mention in a previous conversation that a great way to prevent credit fraud is to apply for credit for your kids. I mean, can you
That's right.
talk specifically, just apply for a credit card for our kids as early as possible? Is that what you would
Do it.
recommend,
Do it.
given your
Yeah,
expertise?
absolutely. My kids all have a credit card through USAA for that exact reason. So the way that credit life cycle works in the credit bureaus is that the first person to claim a social security number, they treat as the legitimate owner of that social security number. And so what bad guys will do, because social security doesn't validate that a name date of birth combo is a unique person, they will exploit that by taking a social security number that isn't yet in circulation. Sometimes it's fictitious, sometimes it's a kid's. They'll tie it to a made up name and date of birth. And if you think about how does that begin? Well, there's these profiles these threat actors have set up. They piggyback it on top of it, just like your parent might co-sign a loan or whatever. Once it has enough tenure in its own right, it is now what's called a synthetic identity, because the name, date of birth, social doesn't represent a new human, but the social is a child social.
Mhm.
Then they do all sorts of fraud. The social gets tarnished and everything else. The kid turns, however old when you're getting a credit card, 17, 18 years old, ready to get a credit card, goes to file for credit. Oh no, this social's already registered and it's got a terrible FICO score and it's associated with fraud. And then you go, no, that's mine. But that's not the way that they treat it. They give precedence to the first person. So now you have to go through a process to prove that you are the legitimate owner of your social because a criminal was able to claim it first. So if you want to head that off, it's basically a digital foot race to like register your kid's social with their actual name and date of birth so that a bad guy can't use their social and tie it to a name and date of birth that don't exist and exploit weaknesses in the financial life cycle for data brokers and credit bureaus.
Will you guys continue this conversation? I'm going to start that process right now.
Yeah, keep safe, man. And that's, I mean, we're in a cool position to do that now too, where like if you think about all this breach data from National Public Data Breach, I think it breached almost every American, from what I understand. What these bad actors will do is they'll just take your name, date of birth, social, and then they'll open a phone line in it. And they'll wait 30, 60, 90 days, kind of like farming. And after a sufficient amount of time, that phone number is now associated with your identity and records. And when they get a code and confirm that they control the phone number, they are proving that they're you. So allowing folks, we're kind of uniquely positioned to do this, that if someone associates a new phone number to your social, we could actually send you a notification and say, hey, Griffin, hey, Jack, like, is that your new phone number? And if it is, you're like, yeah. But if not, you're like, no, I've never seen that before. And so allowing people to keep themselves safe when threat actors are trying to populate regulatory compliant records with phone numbers and names and date of birth that don't actually correspond to your actual identity, we actually provide a feedback loop, or have the potential to, which is really neat, to give people agency over preventing criminals from associating phone numbers that they control and addresses that they control with your identity. And given how much identity theft and scams are out there right now, actually GAO just reported on it from 2018 to 2022, 230 billion to 520 billion dollars lost to fraud every year, not improper payments, but fraud.
No way.
And that it dwarfs assistance to Ukraine, which is like 75 billion. It's about half the defense budget per year, and that's only federal funds at the federal level. It doesn't include federal funds at the state and tribal level, like unemployment benefits. It's insane.
That is
Yeah,
wild.
I guess a major goal of yours to solve, right? I mean, that would be,
We
that
need you,
would
Blake.
Yeah, yeah. You guys want to see one of the, well, I don't know if I have the sanitized video up, but when I get it, there's an amazing deep fake video of a Chinese threat actor attacking an individual American in Pennsylvania and the Treasury itself. So I honestly feel like I'm wearing the uniform again as we're protecting federal agencies coming through.
Mm.
But that report that came out, the Government Accountability Office released it in April of this year. It's not getting nearly enough attention. Ransomware, all the other types of fraud, given where the debt and the deficit's at, it's an unbelievable amount of waste. It's about 9% of the federal budget that's going to fraud.
Yeah.
And it just kills me.
A large part of that fraud is probably not just some guy on a couch in Kansas. It's probably other states, correct? I mean, I would assume it's large actors, other countries that are doing these things.
Oh, it's nation state actors. Like we're going up against hackers that are affiliated with the Chinese government with it's not clear if it's endorsed or like wink wink nod nod. But if you go back to 2022 when NBC News broke the story about hackers affiliated with China's government attacking Americans for individual unemployment benefits, we
Mhm.
helped them break that story. It is crazy what we see and how brazen it is and how these international groups and our nation state enemies are attacking specific government agencies and states. It should be a way, way bigger story because the amount of fraud. But I don't know. Last time I tried to blow the whistle on it, data brokers like and lobbyists managed to get me investigated by Congress instead of the fraud. I mean, it's just, and honestly, it just pisses me off. So it's a righteous fight, and those are the best ones to be a part of.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Good gosh, man. Well, this is probably a terrible segue, but I heard another story, and maybe there's a story here, maybe there's not, but I just figured I'd poke at it, that you had to negotiate with the government of Montenegro for your domain name for id.me. Is that true? And
Yeah.
if so, what was how'd that go down?
Yeah, so public safety alert first. It's just a vanity URL. All the data, it stays in the United States of America. There's no data routed, offshore or anything. Not there's FedRAMP and pre-count stuff.
Of
But
course.
You've been trained well by the lawyers.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I just seen the conspiracy theorists were like, oh
Right.
man, of course, like, the company protecting the government has, sends data to Montenegro. And I'm like, no, dude, like it's a vanity URL. Like it's, that's not how the internet works. So yeah, we host a domain. So
Montenegro's a nice place.
beautiful from what I understand. I've never been there, but yeah, when I realized, IDMe was the perfect name for the company and what we wanted to do, and I was like, what does that mean? Montenegro. I'm like, okay. So Vuxon and Predrag, who are over there, they wanted $250,000 for the domain because it's a premium domain. And I was like, listen, I know you guys want the publicity and like the .me domain, like Visa did v.me, Facebook did fb.me as well around the same time. I was like, how about I commit to like renaming it ID.me? The White House just did a cool blog about us helping military families, and I'll give you $20,000. And they came back like a day or two later and said deal. So yeah,
Nice.
Wow.
yeah. And I mean, again, this is kind of the part where I felt like being sick because I was pivoting the business from like late 2011 to 2012. I was rebranding, hadn't closed the first launch partner. We didn't close Under Armour until I think like October, that it was like a firm deal to even have a launch partner for our wallet. So it was just, you're like literally building as you're flying it and hoping that you have the Indiana Jones thing of like the leap of faith work out. And it's crazy. Like a lot of entrepreneurs who made it big will have moments like that are existential. And it's why anybody who's in the first year or two of building a company, I just feel for, because you can do all the things right and be on the right path, but sometimes you can still get blindside hit by the circumstances. And sometimes it is just luck, and perseverance together that when it works out, it's amazing. But it just as easily could have not worked out. Like if Under Armour didn't give us a shot, there was no safety net or plan B. That would have been it. And then if Marina VA hadn't given us a shot, the CTO, that would have been it. So that's like the crazy part of like why subject yourself to all this when you get to a moment in the journey where it's literally a coin flip about whether you even get to keep playing or not.
With this episode approaching, I've been speaking with some people about it, and when I bring up ID.me, it's funny how many people associate it with military discounts for Under Armour. And it was interesting to hear that that was really the beginning of
Yeah.
the entire thing. So it must have been quite large if people are still associating that with Under
Yeah.
Armour.
Yeah, and I think, look, like there's an emotional angle to this that we're talking with Simon. Jeff Moore, Crossing the Chasm is another great book. It's a scientific method to customer segmentation. And with with Under Armour, there was a story there where Kevin Plank, they didn't discount anybody at the time, and Kevin Plank had gotten one of his big breaks by, I think, selling to the SEAL teams to get going, so had an affinity for the military community because they were part of his story. And it was a very emotional pitch. And I was like, listen, I was like, DoD's only digitized records back to 1980. If you try to white label this and make it more of an API and a form, the Vietnam guys who never felt love from the country like the post 9/11 vets have, they're going to have to upload their DD-214 and wait like 15 minutes. And they're super grumpy and salty about it, as they have every right to be. And they're going to be like, this isn't for me. Just like none of the stuff for the military is ever for me. It's just for the 9/11 plus guys. And I was like, please, like, don't do that, because if you do our model, they only need to validate their service once, and then it's linked to the login, and we're turning an identity verification problem into a login problem. And that's what we now do for everyone, like people who don't have a presence in credit bureaus, students who have their names transcribed and mixed up with registrars. They would all be left out in the cold, like having to repeatedly wait to get adjudicated at every single site. It's like the password problem on steroids. But the beauty of a wallet is that just like after you visit a DMV, it's super easy to pull a credential out of your wallet to prove your identity. And it's been really neat start to do that with Vietnam era veterans. And now there's 10 million Americans that didn't have a presence in credit records that we were able to authenticate digitally and get access to federal and state and local government benefits that we know would not have been able to get through, the vast majority of them, with a data broker or credit bureau. And so super proud of, tagline is no identity left behind, which my kids are like, they're like, Daddy, you stole that line from Trolls. And I'm like, no, it's actually from the Rangers. And I'm like, you know what? I stole it from Trolls. You're right.
They'd much prefer that it be from Trolls originally, of course.
Yeah. I've got to bounce real quick, you guys, because I've got an interview that I've got to hop on. But it's really been a pleasure to spend time with y'all.
Yeah, likewise, Blake. This has been great, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Awesome, Jack. And thanks, Griffin. Really, really awesome to spend time with you guys. Appreciate you.
Yeah, likewise, Blake. Good to see you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.